Everyone, welcome to the April Monday Night Workshop. Hello to those of you who showed up to join us. I am hoping that you all had a wonderful holiday. You already did. I'm assuming you guys did as well. No, it was terrible. My father-in-law is so adorable. He really goes out of the way to do Easter, so he always buys us C's candy. I mean, and I don't want to say no, like Kenny gets me the white chocolate because he knows I won't eat milk chocolate, and the dark chocolate, and just like big things. I'm like, so I always just get in the car and say, Jenna, will you just give this to your boyfriend, please? Make sure somebody else will eat it. But I think Easter's really, I was actually talking to Mark yesterday how Easter seems to be like the second Christmas. Because some people, their Easter baskets, I'm like, why? I mean, huge. There's huge things that they get the kids, and y'all get dressed up, and everyone goes to church and whatnot. Anyway, enough of that. I wanted to just quickly run through some announcements that we have. There's been a couple of changes that have happened this month. We're actually quite excited about some of these. So the first thing is the couples program. Most of you know that we've been talking about doing a couples program for well over a year and a half now. And in January, I had announced that we were going to do it. So we did set the date, which is April 14th. It's April 14th on a Saturday. We figured if it goes well, we might extend it to another couples program towards the middle or the end of the year, a 2-day program, because there's a lot of information we wanted to use. We're kind of wanting to try to shorten down as much as we can. The second thing that I'd like to announce is Omega 2 just got moved up. Instead of in September, we now moved it to the end of June, the early part of July, because we knew we couldn't get in, and the Franciscan was very nice about changing the dates around for us, so we did. We moved Omega 2 up until June, which, if I'm correct, is the Omega 4 in July then? Yep, no? I have got it backwards?
No, the Omega 4 is the end of June, beginning of July. The Omega 2's mid-July.
Mid-July, okay, I got that wrong. So that was the third announcement, was the Omega 4, which is the end of June and the beginning of July. We've been wanting to do that for quite some time. That's the 10-day program, 2 weekends in a row, and in the middle of the week you're on your own. So even though we moved up the 2, you still won't be able to get into the 4 then. I apologize, I had that backwards. The other thing that we did this month is we initiated the $50 deposit. We've been talking about this for a while. As a matter of fact, the board approved this 2 years ago. I've just been dragging my feet because George always wanted to keep this program a free program. So the idea is, because we're completely automated for registration now, it's completely online, people register but then they don't show up. Last year we had something like 68 people register and 24 people showed up. Now that makes a difference by when we have to reserve a room. Do we reserve a room, a larger room, or a smaller room? And so even this last Omega 1, we had 53 on the registration and 32 showed up. So the board talked about this, and what we came up with is the idea of a $50 refundable deposit. We're not keeping it. It's just to hold the seat. And when you show up, you get your money back. And this will be for people who don't come. At least it'll help plan the settings. And then I think that probably encourage people to make sure they put it on their calendars. And they do. Like if they're going to register, they'll actually show up. I think if we put that deposit down. As I said, I've been dragging my feet on this for 2 years now. And we finally put it into play. The Omega 1 in May doesn't have that because we already had it up on the calendar. It will start in the June programs. That's when it will begin. So the Omega 4, even though it's 2 weekends, we're still just doing one $50 deposit on that because we figured that would be enough to get people to stay. So that's our other thing that I wanted to mention. Of course, the next the Wednesday night workshop will be in April, and the topic for that is the maintenance of the work. So that's April 18th. April 18th, that's about the maintenance of the work. This is something I delivered way back in 2002, I believe, is when I delivered it. So I've just rewrote it a little bit, brought it up to date. I'm actually kind of excited to top that subject again because it's a very funny topic. Anyway, those get our updates. So that's now everyone's up to date with what's happening, including me, with what's happening in Omega. So tonight's Monday night workshop, the topic is God is an inside voice. George delivered this in 2002. So I'm not doing the exact workshop as him. I just kind of took some of his ideas and concepts to deliver my version of it, I suppose. So, God's voice. I remember when I first started on this spiritual venture, and the question is, how do you know you're hearing God's voice? What does it sound like? Is it Charleston Heston's voice, booming voice across the sky? Is it the voice of a child? Like, how do you know what God sounds like? Of course, I was thinking of, because Easter just passed, I was thinking of Moses and the burning bush, and this voice booming, that's God, it's got to... And then I thought, if God really did speak, it would be beyond our ears, because it would destroy, if we believe, whatever your thought process is on God. So that's the next question we'd have to think is, what do we think God is? Is it this man up on the throne? Is it a universal being, nirvana, like the Buddhists believe, a universal consciousness? And then, of course, the question is always, which I think this question has always been around theology, is when I pray, there's so many people who pray, and we usually pray for things like the safety of loved ones, the success of a business venture, the health and wealth of a relationship, or, winning the lottery. That's for you. Winning the lottery. Like, we make these prayers, and is God really listening? And, does he intervene on our personal... Do you remember the movie Bruce Almighty? That was very funny. Who was that? Jim Carrey pretended to be God for a week or something, and all the voices of people praying, and then he just did the automatic response, yes, and everybody got what they want. It was total chaos. So God was actually Morgan Freeman, so it could be Morgan Freeman's voice is God as well. But the question is, does God really listen? And is he interfering in our lives, or do we have choice? There's always that concept. Is it already fated, or is there free will? And we have choice. Calvinism is one, and I don't remember what the other philosophy is. But I think that's a good question to ask ourselves. When we pray to God, who are we really praying to, and what are we really asking for? And there's always the philosophy of you be careful you don't get what you wish for. Like, sometimes what you really wish for isn't that good for us. So, anyway, the idea of praying, how do we know it's being answered? And if we didn't pray, would we still get the same response? So that's a good question. Again, I don't have any answers. These are just things that I ponder about in my spare time. George used to say, it doesn't matter if you're a good Christian, if you live a very virtuous life, and if you are on the straight and narrow. He said, if you go out into the desert on a very hot day and you wander around for a week without any water, you're going to die. God's not saving you. So it doesn't matter how much you pray. We have to do things for ourselves. The picture or the idea is, hopefully God will give us guidance, but, you always have the people, oh, God will help you find a water hole. Okay, maybe not. I don't know. I'm not willing to try that philosophy. So again, it's the idea of how do we know God's helping us? There's a very funny joke. So you have to laugh at this. It's a funny joke. There's a gentleman, and a flood was coming. So the water comes up to the porch. He climbs up to the first level. The water comes up to the first level of his house. He goes to the second level. The water rises up to the second level, and then he climbs... Oh, excuse me, I skipped a step. He gets up to his first level, and a boat comes by. Hey, come on here, we can help you. And he said, no. The Lord will save me. I'm fine. So the boat peters away. Then he gets up to the second level. When he's on the second level, he looks out. Another boat comes by. Hey, we can help you. No. The Lord will help me. He will save me. So the other boat goes. And then finally, the water's up to his roof. So he climbs up onto his roof. He's hanging onto the chimney. And this helicopter comes flying around. Hey, grab the rope. And he says, no. The Lord will save me. And the helicopter leaves. And then the water comes and he drowns. So he gets to the pearly gates. And he says to Peter, hey, I prayed and I prayed. What happened? Why didn't you save me? And Peter said, I sent you 2 boats and a helicopter. What more do you want? Laugh. Thank you. But that's the truth. Like, we have an idea what God is going to do. And in his own little way, or her own little way, the assistant shows, but it doesn't match what our thoughts are. So we don't see it. I think that's a very good, even though it's a joke, I think it's a great parable to say, how do we know we're not getting what we're asking for because it doesn't look like what we want? Hearing the voices, so that's the other thing I want to mention. I'm not talking about Son of Sam, you know, the dog told me to kill people, or schizophrenia. People who have schizophrenia clearly hear voices. That great movie, A Beautiful Mind, where it was, oh, I see his name, the gladiator guy.
Travolta?
Russell Crowe, where he literally saw and heard people that weren't there. That's not what I'm talking about. Obviously, that's a medical condition. It's the other things that we can't quite explain. So before I take one more step further on this, I'd like to do a little illustration. When we think about the voice, or inner voice, what we're looking for, it's kind of a guidance. We're looking for guidance. So if my job was to try to get this piece of paper out as far as I can go, I can do that, and there's not much distance that's going to happen. I have to like disappear. Hold on. So back, I could take this piece of paper and wad it up, and with force I can throw it. It'll make it, but it requires force. I get the idea that guidance isn't force, though. I think guidance is a gentle support. So if I were to fold this up into a paper airplane and then toss it across the room, it would go with less force and probably a little bit more distance and not cause any problems. Hopefully, not poke anybody in the eye. But that would be the idea. It's a guidance, like it's the support of what my intention is, not force. It's the support of my intention. So when I think about that, then we think about, if we're searching for our guidance system to direct our lives, who do we search to? Now, of course, history is filled, absolutely filled, with many teachers and philosophy. Mark, I'm so sorry, I have to disappear, I've got to get my water. Where history is filled with many teachers and philosophy, I'm back, teachers and philosophy about what to do, who to look for, ways to find our inner guidance. Thank you. So, the world's greatest guidance system has often been called by greater teachers of the past the inner voice. I know I mentioned that before, the inner voice. Now, it's not like there's a voice inside of me that's telling me what to do, unless you saw the movie Inside Out, that cartoon, with all the little characters telling everybody what to do. That's not what we're referring to as well. Man, I'm making a lot of movie references tonight, aren't I? So, how do we distinguish ourselves from the inner voice as well as the other voices that we hear? Again, not like schizophrenia, but there really are other voices in our mind. If we think about inner voice, if I'm quiet and I'm thinking, is that God? No, it's me, I'm thinking. I'm having the thought process and I can follow my thought process. I can sit there and think of anything I want to and go off on a tangent, but that's not God. That's me directing my mind. When I think about an inner guidance system, it's kind of like when you have a plane that leaves Los Angeles and is flying to Tokyo. The plane doesn't go just straight there. It goes through the jet stream, and it's always going like this, but there's an automatic pilot that brings it back onto course. If the automatic pilot dissipates, or doesn't work, or if it fails, the plane often is considered lost. And that happened a couple of years ago, the Malaysian plane, which they still haven't found, believe it or not. I'm surprised with our technology. We can't find a huge airplane, but it disappeared. I'm saying Bermuda Triangle, that's it, we're good. So, how do we distinguish between the different voices? First thing we have to do is learn or observe the different types of voices we experience. One type of voice that we have, we must distinguish the difference between fact and opinion. There are many people who walk around as if their opinions are facts, and that can confuse us. When I think my opinion is a fact, and I'm following my opinion, and it's really not a fact, I'm deceiving myself and following an illusionary voice. It's just an opinion. If I listen to someone else's opinion and I take it as fact, again, I'm in an illusion. So I have to determine between fact and opinion. Now, I'm not being political, but I really do like the statement, fake news. I mean, you have to really be aware of yourself. Where's the material coming from? The internet has its pros and its cons. Great information at our thumb, but not necessarily the truest information. So sometimes you have to take due diligence to find out the actual facts. Many people don't take the time to do that. So whoever has the loudest voice often appears to be the most factual. And that's sad that we're influenced by the loudest voice rather than what actually is factual. The second thing we have to do is to learn to distinguish between a need and a want. For example, I need chocolate, or do I want chocolate? Naturally, it's a want. That's an easy one. But then we think about the needs and the wants. Do I need a larger house? Do I need a better job? Do I need a different relationship? Do I need a different spouse? Do I need a different location? Do I need a different car? Like, that's materialistic. But I also can think about, do I want to belong to a group? Or do I need to belong to a group? Like, there's the distinction of what's necessary or what's a desire. So the need would be something required for me. A desire is something that's just my preference, is what it ends up. So preferences, again, an illusionary voice. Now, I've had preferences before. I still have preferences. I want to go to the gym, and I hit the snooze button because I didn't sleep well. Oh, no, and I changed my mind. So that voice inside of me is not God telling me hit the snooze button. That's my preference telling me to hit the snooze button. So there's a good distinction right there. The third voice we have to listen to is the distinction between thoughts and feelings. This is a little bit harder. A lot of couples often talk about this, he doesn't hear me or she's not listening because one's expressing and thinking and one's expressing and feeling. The difference between thinking and feeling, thoughts and feeling, I actually said it, thoughts are related to thinking, feelings are related to emotions. There are people when you ask, well, how do you feel? And they give you a thinking answer. How do you feel? Well, I think that would be an appropriate thing to do. No, how do you feel? Like, it's difficult for some people to get to the actual, how it feels, because logic comes into play. So we have to be able to rise above our logic and get in touch with more of an intuition, is probably a good word to use there. Those are the different voices that we have. We have illusionary voices is what I would go with on that one. I'm going to use another movie. The Bishop's Wife. Every Christmas I always watch this movie. Ever since I can remember, I've always watched this movie as an adult, ever since I left the home. This has always been one of my standard Christmas movies. My husband is now one of his standards. Oh, a bird came to visit. My husband is one of his standard movies. So The Bishop's Wife, it's a black and white movie with Cary Grant. They don't make actors like this anymore. Cary Grant, I mean, just talented. Anyway, he's an angel. And he's coming to visit the bishop, because the bishop has been praying for this great cathedral. And this great cathedral requires a lot of money. So the bishop has been praying to make this work, and he wants these people to give him all his money. And the older woman, oh my gosh, it's escaped me, I know her name, Agnes, and I don't remember her last name, but the older woman who's very wealthy will not build the cathedral. She will not make a donation until the bishop does exactly what she wants to do. So he's having all these fights with her. So Cary Grant comes down and he's going to meddle with the situation. But now that I gave you the format, here's one of the greatest lines or the stories that happen. He's downstairs talking to the bishop's child, the little girl. She's Debbie, maybe 6 or 7. And Debbie says, tell me a story. And Cary Grant says, well, back in a long time ago, there was a shepherd named David. And he was watching his sheep, and one of the sheep went off. And so he was playing his little music, and an angel came and woke him up and said, hey, one of your sheep has strayed. So David goes and looks, and there's a lion. So David says, hey, you get away from that lion. And the lion says, you get away from me or I'll eat you too. And then the angel puts the idea in David's head to take out his slingshot and use a rock and hit the lion straight between the eyes. Lion goes away, and David picks up the sheep and brings it back to his fold, and then writes the song, the Lord is my shepherd. And honestly, I don't know the whole thing, but that's the verse. So as Cary Grant is telling the story, Debbie, the little girl, says, wow, how did David know how to throw the rock? And Cary Grant said, because an angel taught him to do it, and that's the way it always is. Angels put thoughts in our heads, and we think we're the ones coming up with the thoughts. when it really isn't. It's an angel who does it. So it's a very quick jump to go from angel to God. So right there, I think it's a beautiful picture. Back in the 40s, they were talking about the distinction of voices in our heads being planted by do-gooders or people who want to take care of us, angels, in that illustration. Now, when I think of that, if you think about this, he said, that's the way it always is. Then I have to think about, well, how many times have I had that experience? Where all of a sudden I'll have this thought pop into my mind. I'll have this idea that I hadn't thought about before. Or if you've ever had that experience where you're stuck on something, and then they usually say, let it go, walk away, and then come back, and it'll come back to you, or you'll get an idea. I think that's probably the voice, if I can use that, inner voice. I'm going to switch over to the inner voice. That's my inner voice. There are many workshops and lectures and books written on how to get in touch with your inner voice. The thing that I really liked what George said here, and I'm going to quote him now from this one. He says, the inner voice is not audible, nor is it visible. We can't see it, and we literally can't hear it. So what does that mean? Well, it's an inner knowing. It's the ability, you can't quite put your thumb on it, but you know it. You know it's there, you've got that, yes, that's it. Like a light bulb that pops on. So George continues, says, it's not accessed by logic or thinking. It does not respond to education, nor does it respond to intellectual activity to groom it or attract it. So in other words, you can't do some psychological exercises to increase your inner voice. You can't, like you go to the gym and you work out, you can't work out your inner voice. It's the opposite of what we do in the physical world. In the physical world, when we want to get healthy, we go work out, we do a routine. If you want to have a clean house, you've got to clean the house. You have to clean the house, unless you can hire a maid, but somebody's got to clean the house. So it requires maintenance and taking care of, there's effort. When it comes to the inner voice, there's no effort. It's effortless, I guess is the way I would describe that. It doesn't emanate from the emotions, so this is above our emotions. You cannot demand its presence, so you can't just sit here, okay, now. It doesn't happen that way. Like I mentioned earlier, it's not force. It has nothing to do with our brain power, our physical discipline, or with, George wrote New Age thinking, but some people, you sit and you got crystals. I have a crystal on. You sit and you got crystals and you own and you chant. It's not associated with that either. It's actually the idea of letting go. And then, of course, people who've been in recovery programs, the line is, let go, let God. That's let go and let God. Hand it over to my higher self. I think that's what they call it, the higher self. I hand it over to my higher self. George continues to say that formal meditation does not command the voice. Generally, the more you think you know, the less chance you have of hearing the voice. So the more I think I know, the less I actually will connect with that inner voice. And this, to me, I think is a good example. When you're stuck on a problem and we do the research, and we look and jot down our pros and our cons, and we look for exact details and facts and figures, enhancing things, and I gather all the information, we often feel more lost than when we first started. Now that I've got all this information, I'm still no closer to the decision. I've got great information for both sides, but I still don't know which way to go. That would be an example of how you can't think the inner voice. The inner voice is like an emissary from another world. And we're going to get a little woo-woo here. So it doesn't visit us per se. It's associated with a life that's within us. Now that's a question. What does it mean, the life within us? So my physical body is alive. Yes, I'm breathing and my heart's beating. You're breathing, your heart's beating. So physically, we're alive. Is that the life within us? I don't know. My brain, like my soul, is that people refer to as the soul. Well, what is the soul? Is the soul what's guiding me? Like, the Men in Black, the little prince that was inside the guy's head operating. Is that the life within me? I don't know. Scientists, biologists, you can go down to the cell, and the cells actually have their own division process. Is that a life inside of that? The nucleus, if we even go all the way down to the nucleus with the atoms, the protons and the neutrons, is that the life within us? You can even take it further back to the DNA. The DNA that makes each and every one of us unique. Is that the life within us? I think that's probably the closest thing that we can think of, is the DNA that makes our uniqueness and carries our genetic coding. That's probably the closest I could say to being the life within us, but my mind thinks, well, how is that life? That, when I think of genetic coding, I think of that little ladder that twists around when you see the DNA pictures. It's that ladder. What is that, life? That looks like a rope ladder and I'm climbing up it. So I'm not sure that's the life that we're experiencing. George continues to say that since life is in us, it's inseparable from our breath. One can actually learn to hear and feel the voice in the breathing. Now that does make sense. If I stop breathing, I'm dead. Literally, I'm brain dead. If you do not have enough oxygen in your system, you are brain dead. My heart can stop, but as long as the oxygen is still flowing and you're doing CPR, I'm still alive. But if my airway is blocked, 2 minutes. 2 minutes is all they give you. And after that, you're considered brain dead. There's no activity happening. Even though your physical body might come alive, you still have no brain activity. No oxygen, so the brain is gone. It's just gone. So you just have a physical shell, I guess is the best way to describe this. I did experience a little girl who lost oxygen for a little bit over 2 minutes. And she was brain dead. Her body just shut down. And what happened is her temperature spiked up to 105. She was 2 years old. Temperature spiked up way to 105, and then it was escalating. They said actually when she got to the hospital, I believe they said it was like 106 or 7. That's dangerous. If it hits 108, you're dead. And so the first thing they did is immersed her in water, cold, ice water to drop her temperature, and then fluids in her body to cool her down. And while I'm sitting in the emergency room with her, my mind is thinking, okay, what's going to happen? She's a little over 1 year old. How do we know how this is going to affect her brain? She was without oxygen. How do we know? And I'm asking the nurse all kinds of questions. So what are the things we look for? This is my grandchild. What are the things we look for? What are the things that we can do to help enhance? What do we do? And the nurse is like, she's so young. There's nothing. You can't. There's nothing you can tell. But my daughter said that when she got her home, she noticed something was different. Like all of a sudden, she couldn't find her way to the room. 2-bedroom apartment. Couldn't find her way to the bedroom. Very disorientated, very lost. And then, of course, as she got older, there definitely was some brain damage, and she spent her entire educational life in special ed because she couldn't comprehend it. He said she's something like, I think, a 6 to 8 year old comprehension, a little bit. She's 18 now. She still has just that mentality about her. That's because we lost the oxygen. Her heart was still beating, but the oxygen, when she got so hot, her brain said, that's it, shut down, save the body. And it just shut down, and the lungs quit working. So it's our lungs. I remember the stories always, what's the most important part of your body? And some people think, it's your heart, stomach. The stomach is the most important, digestion, which is true. We need our digestion to support our system, or it could be the nerves. That's what helps me move around. The brain, which firing the synapses to get the nerves to move. Our muscles. Without our muscles, we can't. There's so many things to say. What's the most important part? But here, George is equating life, the life within me, is the breath. Now, as a side note, there's many in Eastern traditions that talk about yoga, breathing, meditation based on the breath. So I'm going to agree with that. But back to where we are. If it's connected to our breath, now, ready? If it's connected to our breath, when I inhale, where am I pulling the air from? Outside of me. I'm inhaling and exhale. That means that life is not only inside of me, it's outside of me. So it's coming to me from the outside and I'm sending it back. So, right, is the inner voice really the in-between the outside and the inside? If I think God is the inner, it's the breath, that means it's coming in from outside. So that goes with the statement, God's everywhere. Because if I'm breathing and the air is everywhere, that's God everywhere. Life. We can say that's life everywhere. So if I breathe in, I take that breath, I fill my lungs, I'm breathing in life, and then I'm exhaling life. So I'm in the rhythm. Hermetic philosophy talks about the rhythm. Everything has a rhythm. Every human being has a rhythm. Therefore, when I step into the rhythm, if I step into the rhythm, I'm stepping into the flow of life through my breath. Now, another movie aphorism. This will be my last one. The movie Always, another one of my favorite movies, Richard Dreyfuss and Audrey Hepburn. Audrey Hepburn is an angel. Richard Dreyfuss dies and becomes an angel for Holly Hunter, who's still a pilot. He was a pilot putting out forest fires. So he becomes the angel for her and the gentleman she ends up falling in love with. Anyway, Audrey Hepburn is explaining to Richard Dreyfuss how it works to be the angel. They can't see you, but they can hear you. And he starts doing these stupid things like putting oil on the guy's face and, you know, just goofy things to say, haha, I'm in control, and realizing whatever you say is actually happening to the guy. So Audrey Hepburn is explaining to Richard Dreyfuss what this actually means, like along the same lines of Cary Grant, but she said, and there was a line in the movie, she said, inspiration is the breath of God. That was probably the first time I ever have heard the statement, information is the breath of God, inspiration is the breath of God. And she said it so beautifully. And the idea that when I'm pulling in, I'm receiving God. I'm receiving life and my inner voice. So somehow inside of me, when I'm receiving that in, I'm able to translate it without thinking about it. I'm able to have that knowing without thinking about it. I don't understand the technology or the method of how that happens. I do know that that's quite familiar how it seems, that's how it happens. I've always had the idea that God's voice is found in the stillness, in those quiet moments. So this is why meditation is so imperative. Meditation is one way, but it's not the only way to have that stillness or the calmness. The contemplation. You could sit and just journal. That can bring a stillness. People oftentimes have inspirations in the shower. My husband has it all the time. He'll come out and he'll start writing. As a matter of fact, in the early 2000s, somebody came up with the idea of putting a whiteboard in the shower so you could just write notes while you're in the shower. I remember that. It didn't take on. But in nature, nature's a wonderful place for us to find the stillness. There are people who find stillness in the wind. Like the whisper of the wind, that's where they get their inspirations, because you can hear the wind. It's probably my most favorite part of nature is the wind. The waves, people can be mesmerized and put in a very relaxing state of the waves. Sunrises and sunsets, so sometimes it may not even do auditory, it's just visual. They're just watching a beautiful sunset or a beautiful sunrise, and visually I'm placed in a state of peace and inspiration. Walking out in nature. You don't even have to have it, but you just be outside in the woods, walking. Up in Sedona, hiking in the rocks. You don't need to carry crystals with you, just walking and you'll experience it. On this property here, they have the labyrinth, which is that big circle that you walk through. It's all about inspiration on that one, setting your intention and then just walking and allowing the voice. Native Americans use sweat lodges. I love sweat lodges. I used to attend them all the time. I have a Native American name that was given to me. Another interesting side note. So we're in the sweat, and the shaman, he's going to give all of us names. It's the day we get names. So my one friend, she gets white wolf. I'm like, oh, that's really pretty. Another friend, white buffalo woman. Oh my gosh, that's great. Another one, white thunder child, or just thunder child. I was like, oh, nobody said the eagle yet. I want the eagle, big eagle, big eagle. And I'm thinking, eagle, eagle, eagle. I'm probably praying, eagle, eagle, eagle. And then he turns, and we're in the sweat. It's all dark and everything. And he turns and says, and your name is the woman who dances in the northern sky. What? Can you make it any longer? I have a long name anyway, and now that's my name? What about the eagle? And I was very disappointed. I walked out there and went, you got a white wolf, and you got a white buffalo, and I'm the woman who dances in the northern sky. It's cold. So after we got out and we sat down, if you've ever done a sweat, it's rounds that you do, and you do prayers and offer up prayers to grandfather and grandmother. And then you all come out and then sit down and share a meal with each other, because supposedly you've fast for a little bit before the sweat, and then you would share a meal together. So we're sitting down, and I settled up to the shaman, and I said, what the heck? What's the name? Why? Why do I have this very long name? And he looked at me and he said, well, I felt like you weren't going to be pleased with it, but I don't think you understand the whole intention of it. The idea is the woman who dances in the northern sky connects you to the earth and the sky. So you are one who is connected with both realms, the physical and the ethereal, the intuitional. You're the one who has the ability to flex back and forth between the spirit world and the earth world. And after he said that, I was like, yeah, I got the best name. But even that was an inner voice. Like when the shaman gives you a name, he is inspired by the voice within to hand the names out to you. And when you hand out a Native American name, it's yours for life. There's no changing it. Like here, we can change our name to get married, or redo your name. In the Native American, it's your name. The concept of naming something, George did a great section on this when we name something, but when we name something, it changes our attunement. For a matter of fact, when you hear somebody say, Linda, your ear, well, I just said Linda, like New Yorker, but Linda. When your ear goes up and you think, oh, that's it. Someone says to you, yeah, I got it. So when we hear our name, our attunement, and we're piqued, it catches our attention. Therefore, when we're named or something is given to us from the other world, I guess I can say, it captures our attention. Like, think about the names you were given. Your parents chose those names for you, unless you're somebody who changed your name. But our parents are the ones who came with it. I remember my grandson, when he was born, my daughter, that's my other daughter, and her husband, big burly football guy. You know, he's the one who told me I'm not allowed to do any Winnie the Pooh stuff for my grandson. He's going to be a guy. We're going to do man stuff. Okay. And then he ended up loving Winnie the Pooh. Had nothing to do with me. But I remember they were tossing, you know, what do we do? What kind of name? And, you know, parents go through the name choosing. And back then, they wanted to be able to call the baby by name, so by the time the baby came out, it was resonating with our voice. The mother's voice would connect with it, and it could hear our voices, and we talked to her tummy. So they couldn't decide on the name, and Brian went to sleep and woke up, and the next morning he said Marcellus. And I'm like, where did that come from? He's like, I don't know. And that's his name. Did the same thing for my granddaughter as well. They didn't know, couldn't decide what they were going to do, had a dream, woke up, Asia. Like he just said, it's Asia, and then it's A-Y-S-I-H or something. Just said it. So sometimes the voices come to us in our dreams. And this guy was not very, religious and spiritual prayer. No, it just came to him in his dreams. I love you, Brian. I'm not making fun of you. So when we have dreams, sometimes that can be the voice of God as well that comes to us in our dreams. Of course, I mentioned Moses heard the burning bush. That was... I wasn't there, so I don't know. But Jacob, with Jacob's ladder, that was a dream. He went to sleep and dreamed he went to a heaven, and then he climbed a ladder and went to a second heaven, climbed a ladder, went to a third heaven. So he went to 7 different heavens. And that's what's considered I said climbed a ladder. He was, one rung was one heaven, the next rung was the second heaven. So he went up 7 rungs, and that was Jacob's ladder. That's the idea of Jacob's ladder. All of that happened in a dream. Now, curious. Some people, psychics or people who are like Nostradamus, I don't think he considered himself a psychic, maybe a visionary. He used a bowl of water. And I'm not going to go into the details of that, but that was his tool to connect with the inner voice. So there was a bowl of water that he initiated. There are some people who like to use cedar and sage or scents, candles, some meditations with a candle, and you look at visualize the flame, and that can set you into a meditative state as well. So again, the whole concept is, in order to connect with my inner voice, I've got to disconnect my brain. That's the biggest challenge. How do we disconnect our brain? I cannot tell you how many times that we've done meditations, and I always have someone come up to me and say, I can't shut my mind off. And there's different philosophies, just let your mind go, or once you're aware that you're wandering, bring your mind back. I honestly don't know what's the best way. Whatever works for you, when you discover your mind's wandering. I actually sometimes just have a pad of paper next to me, and I'll just journal, get the thought out of my head, and then just reset my attention again. I've been meditating for almost my entire life, and it still happens to me. So It's not like there's an end-all, cure-all. But I do understand the concept of looking for and searching for the inner voice and connecting it to our breaths. So then I think about, when we think of our breath, you know how when we get excited, we all take that big breath, like we fill our lungs? Somehow the excitement increases by the breath, increases our life. Most of the time, when we're getting excited and we take that big breath, we have a great high is not the word I want to use, but you know what I mean. It's that sensation of exhilaration and life running through them. And I really think it has to do with the inhale. And then if you click on the flip side, like the sadness, when you're, and most people who sigh when they're depressed or upset or frustrated, are like, and we let go of the breath and hold it out. Most of the time we just go, and we actually make a sound with it. And that, to me, you're losing the life force. I find that very intriguing. The ones who sigh are usually the ones not connected, and the ones who have those big breaths of exhilaration are the ones who are excited. You think about children when they're young. They're always laughing and playing and screaming, and they always do take, oh, look, when they see, Grandma, they see you in excitement, and there's always the big breaths. There's not many sighs. Even when they scream and yell, they're still doing it quite loud. But I think that is an upset right there, probably. But that's easy to switch off with them. But I think that the connection with the voice, with the breath, I really do feel like that's where my inner voice lies. Where if God does exist, it's in that intangible thing, cannot be measured, but it does fill my presence. When you think about oxygen does come through and it disperses itself throughout my body instantaneously. It's not like I have to wait 20 minutes for this little oxygen molecule to run through my system and then come back out again. It's instantaneous, which I believe is how the inner voice is as well. Very instantaneous. Once I surpass my brain and just breathe, connect to the breath, I have the opportunity to have an instantaneous connection to God, inner voice, etc. George said that the inner voice is the spiritual guidance system within all human beings, just like the guidance system on the airliners or any vehicle. Tesla is now the voice of God. Siri, oh wait, my phone's going to go off. Siri will be the voice of God as well, right? All of that can occur. Just wait. So, without our voice or without our guidance system, we might be able to achieve certain goals and realize material success, but we are without fulfillment. And that I've experienced. Many people who've gotten to the point of great success, but there's something left inside of them. They can't grasp it. There's something missing. He says, to have peace and fulfillment, we must be able to complete the journey and connect ourselves to the inner voice, because it's the only guiding light. When I think about connecting and letting go, which are the things I've mentioned, it makes me think of, like, this will be the last story that I want to tell you. Second time I went skydiving. Second time I went skydiving, first time I almost fell out of the plane. It was a horrible, terrible experience because I almost fell out of the plane. So I made myself go a second time, and I paid attention. The first time I wasn't paying attention, somebody opened the door and I went to roll to get my chute was underneath the instrument panel because I was talking to the pilot, and when I went to roll, I didn't know the door was open, and I rolled and started rolling out the plane. Not funny. Anyway, terrible experience. So I made myself go a second time. And this one was probably, this is a memory that just has sat with me. It's like every time I tell it, I'm back there again. So I jumped out of the plane. I had two jump masters with me. They left me at 55. I pulled my own chute. And there I am descending to the earth. It's the last jump of the day, so the sun is setting. I was out in Buckeye. So you've got this beautiful mountain range at the end. The sun is setting, no sound. You can kind of hear the parachute, but literally no sound. And it was like me, the horizon, and God, for lack of a better way to describe it. Me, horizon, and God. And in that moment, it's as if time stood still. And I looked out, and I can't quite give the exact description of what I experienced. It was just a knowing. All at once, I looked out and I felt everything. And yet I knew I wasn't there, but I was. It was like you feel this expansion. So I felt this connection to the sun setting and the mountains and the clouds and the air. Like I just felt plugged in, even though I was completely suspended and not touching anything. So it was that inner sense of knowing beauty. It was an inner sense of knowing joy. It was an inner sense of knowing the connection, and the inner sense of knowing, without sounding hokey, like we're all one. Like it was that inner sense of knowing that who I am affects who you are, and who you are affects who I am, and the rhythm of life. All of that was given to me in a flash. I mean, literally a flash. So it was like time stood still, and I was suspended, literally, in the air, but not, I didn't feel like I was falling. If you've ever done skydiving, you don't feel like you're falling. It's a very strange sensation. You just have to keep looking at your altimeter, and the altimeter tells you you're going down. And when you look down, you see the ground getting bigger. But if you look out, you don't feel like you're falling at all. It's just suspension. And I remember that overwhelming warmth, expansion, love, whatever you want to call it, just washing over me and feeling complete and total peace. So much so that if my chute disconnected and I went crashing to the ground, it wouldn't have bothered me. It was just at a peace, a level of peace I have not tasted often. But not. It was one of those things I hadn't expected. I was going to go skydiving and face my fear from falling out last time, and it was nothing completely. So it's like I had disengaged, and who I was. Maybe it's because the air was better up there, and I don't know, I was connecting to God better, so cleaner air and better. I don't know. That was a joke. Laugh. Thank you. But the concept, again, like I stated, it's the knowing. And for people who try to explain that, you can't. You know you've had it, but there's no way to really explain it. And people who know it, you shake your, oh yeah, been there. And people who don't, they're like, what, explain. So it's a hard thing to quite put your finger on it. So I think that's the best description I can use for the inner voice. Again, in review, it would be the concept of being able to connect with my breath, disconnecting from my brain, and just be. Practice the concept of just be. Many years ago in the New Age era, when it first came out, the idea just be came out. You know, you had the people, oh, I'm not going to get a job, I'm just going to be. Well, you need to continue making contribution, make an effort. You can't just be everywhere. But the concept of just be, I think, was taken out of context. I think this concept of just be, sitting in a meditative state and just be. There are those who do struggle with meditation. What do you do? What are you supposed to think of? And the different types of meditation, the TM, Transcendental Meditation, where you take a mantra and repeat it over and over. That concept is to get rid of all the other thoughts and just focus on a word, focus on the word or a phrase. Just focus continuously on the word to disconnect. That's one way. The other way is guided visualization, to disconnect. And some people just sit and relax and just be. George used to do the greatest inspiration for me. George would sit at 2 o'clock in the morning, sit at his computer, and stare at a blank screen. I've tried this. It doesn't work for me. I need to have books around me so I could just like see a word or something and inspire me. But he would sit and stare at the blank screen and put his hands right over the keys and wait. And just simply wait for inspiration. Now, 2, 3 in the morning, I'm going to fall asleep. Well, not nowadays, I'm more up now, but back then, you know, you sit there and stare at a blank screen and nothing moving, you get quite tired. But George would push through it. He would push past the tiredness, he would push past the fatigue, and he'd sit there and just wait. And he wouldn't move his hands until he felt inspired to. And he did this for so many years, way before he even started Omega. He did it for so many years that he got to a point where he almost knew how long the time would take. He had the idea, he knew how long it would take for him to sit there before inspiration started to flow. And he'd get a thought, and then he'd start writing this thought, and then it would take him to another connection, and then he would write that connection, and then before you knew it, he just started flowing. So for those of you who are writers, most people have to do a draft or an itinerary, chapter 1 is going to be this, chapter 2 is this. He never did. He sat and wrote from beginning to end in one pass. In one pass. Now those of you who've seen his workshops, some of them 18, 19 pages, one pass. Just sit there and write it. And then, of course, what he would do is he'd go back and edit it and change it around. But the very first draft was the first one. He had no thoughts, no design. I'm going to talk about this to connect it. Nothing. He would just sit and wait. Of course, sometimes he'd have a topic, and he'd just sit and wait, and then it would just flow to him. I think that perhaps is a good illustration of connecting to the inner voice. Something you can't quite teach. For him, many, many years sitting and staring at a blank screen. Sometimes he'd sit there for hours and get nothing and just get up and walk away and just commit to do it again. But he was committed to the practice. That's what they would call it a practice. Meditation is called a practice. Yoga is called a practice. So that's what I would encourage you. If it's something you're looking for, the inner voice, those of us who are looking for direction, the inner voice, connect with your breath, and then wait. Just be. Allow it to connect. Again, you can't force it. You can't command it. You cannot demand it. It must be allowed. Just like we don't control the exchange of oxygen in our lungs, we don't control the aerial, the little lung sacs, the sacs in our lungs. We don't control that they're going to open, take in oxygen, and get rid of carbon monoxide. We don't control that. It happens naturally. Same thing with our heartbeat. We don't really control that either. It happens naturally. We can control our breath, though. We can control our breath. Exhale and inhale. I find that curious that we can control life, whether we're going to increase it or decrease it. We can control that, but yet we let go. Most of us don't actually think about breathing. Actually, this is the biggest hindrance I have, is I have a tendency to breathe shallow. And I have to remind myself to take those big deep breaths. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things I like about the iWatch. It has a thing on there where it's breathe, and it reminds me once an hour, breathe, take a deep breath. But I've been thrown in the hospital because I don't take enough. At one time I wasn't breathing enough, like 3 breaths. I would do 3 inhales in a minute, which you're supposed to do far more than that, but I just like, well, anyway, doesn't matter. So breathing, to me, I think is very important, obviously. It's very important, but it connects us to the source of life. I know I'm repeating myself here. I really just want to get the point across. It's breathing and letting go. Breathing and letting go. Rise behind your head, rise above your thinking. Just breathe and let go. That's all you have to do. Just breathe and let go. So I'll encourage you to do that for this next month, and then when you come back next Monday, let me know how it happened, if you were able to remember to do it, and how well or successful you were when you're breathing and letting go. So thank you all for tuning in on Facebook. Thank you all for showing up here this evening. I look forward to seeing you. The next time we'll see each other is Wednesday. Well, you'll see me. I won't see you. It's Facebook Live. Again, it's the maintenance of the work. And then, of course, those of you who come for the couples program, we'll see you on April 14th. Have a good evening. Thank you for being here. Bye now.
Okay.